Mr. Kobrovsky, Mr. Werman, and the chairman who serves on all councils. Do I have a motion to approve the minutes of September 5th, 2024?
So moved.
Second.
Moved and properly seconded. Any discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Ayes have it. Our agenda item 2A is in response to the letter we received from the Charleston County Housing and Redevelopment Authority relating to the sale of 30 home sites. And so we wanted to bring to full council, well, this committee first, but then to full council, a discussion about whether or not it is within the council's wishes to perhaps pursue the purchase of those homes like we did for the other 18 sites, and in a real effort to keep them affordable. What the Housing Authority has planned to do is sell them, and they will go to full market rate and not be affordable anymore for the new purchaser. So any discussion on that? Reverend Middleton and then Mr. Pryor? Oh, welcome.
Oh, yeah, very good. Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Listen, I think we should certainly explore it. You know, we've talked a lot here over the last 4 years about housing. A lot of the focus has been on creating new housing, and I don't know how many of these are occupied, maybe none of them, but nevertheless, the point is, you know, you got to play defense here too, and if we've got an opportunity, like we did with the 18 we did before, to not dig a deeper hole for ourselves, I think we've at least got to explore it for sure. And I would be, frankly, pretty hesitant to sell off any housing asset to transfer it into being market rate. So I think it's certainly worth exploring.
Mr. Pryor?
So are they willing to work with us, or are they willing to wait? Because I know I thought they had a buyer, and they were going to put it all out, but do they have a buyer? Anybody know whether they have a buyer? Are they going to
Mr. Rand.
get them one by one?
So I'll take it. Mr. Pryor, we've not been able to confirm whether or not they have a buyer on the hook, but we have had conversations with them, and then they provided this letter to us, which indicates that there is an opportunity for the county to get involved if it so intends.
Okay, so next question is how will we pay for this out of some of our, it's ARPA funds, or do we have any, council, we just?
I think the directive tonight should be focused on investigating what we have and the opportunity would be, and then let staff bring that back to us. But I'm certainly willing to, I don't know that they have all those answers quite yet.
Okay, that's really interesting. I just want to make sure if they say, yeah, we'll be able to do it, because I think it's an excellent idea to keep them affordable, and whatever it takes, we need to have the administrator find $8 million.
Yeah. Mr. Boykin?
Ms. Ham, do we need to take any action on council or the committee to stay the action of the authority as far as them carrying through with the transaction, or is that effectively halted until we approve it specifically?
Their letter doesn't indicate any specific action that you need to take, but I do think it would be prudent to indicate that there is interest, or at least allow some directive for staff to pursue this particular avenue to see what is available, whether or not, you know, there's a current buyer and what our opportunities are.
Then I would just make that recommendation to the committee to explore that.
Yep, I think we're ready with a motion.
So, one more question.
Go ahead.
One more question, please. So technically, they're a separate entity, we just appoint them. We can't force them to sell to us, but we can kind of say, as a mutual agreement, would you be willing to do this, correct? I mean, because I think what Mr. Boykin is asking us to do is pass an ordinance to tell them they can't sell it, and I don't think we can do that.
Let's move on.
Because legally, you know, they're under the feds, and I got to remember they're under the feds, and we just appoint their board.
Right.
So
I think that there are some statutory provisions that that will work well for the county in this particular situation without providing you with legal
Say no
advice.
more. If you think you say no more, you're the expert.
Any other comments or concerns? All right, Mr. Werman?
Yeah, I'd like to move the committee to direct the administrator and the county attorney to work with the county's housing authority to pursue a purchase of these 30 homes that are currently being offered for sale.
Is there a second? Second. All right, it's been properly moved and seconded. Those on the committee, all in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? All right, motion carries. Mr. Chairman?
Thank you. One more thing, Ms. Honeycutt.
Yes, sir. Mr. Pryor?
Since some of these homes are in North Charleston, city of Charleston.
All over.
And all over. Would it be, a good idea to maybe see if we can ask them to help with funding to save some of these things? Because I think they all like affordable housing as well, too. And this is going to benefit some of these entities. And so we may not have to go alone if we can maybe ask these entities, Mr. Rand, to see if they would be willing to, put up something, because a bunch of them is in North Charleston and downtown Charleston. James Island, Hollywood.
Right.
But, in the unincorporated area, like those little smaller towns, maybe not, but the bigger municipalities, maybe we might want to try to, do a holistic approach to see if we can work something out.
Great. Mr. Anton can include that in that. Excellent.
Thank you.
All right. I think that's it, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. All right, welcome to our Finance Committee meeting. First order of the day is approval of the minutes of September 19th.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussions, corrections? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it. Item number 2, Union Pier TIF District Redevelopment Plan Discussion. Ms. Honeycutt.
Yep. I wasn't here the night that the mayor was able to come and speak, so I apologize again for that. But I did want to perhaps have our staff look into and make a few recommendations about the TIF district as it's currently proposed. I think there's some questions remaining. I know that the city isn't even privy, I don't believe, to the contract between the port and the purchaser. But I would like to know what I want to make sure the county gets the best it can out of this transaction without having to fund county services that it will not receive revenue for in the term of the TIF. I also am concerned we don't have really any expenditure plan in place from the city, so at least to have some conversations about what they intend to do with the funds that they collect, because, again, giving up that much revenue over that period of time that could be generated, granted, we don't collect any now, so it's certainly a fantastic opportunity. Just want to make sure that we are clear on what our options are, so.
Thank you. Mr. Pryor?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Honeycutt, I'm going to go from a different angle, and maybe we might can get some answers. So I think the biggest winner of this whole situation is going to be the Port of Charleston State Ports Authority, and I'll tell you why. Right now, they're not paying any taxes on the current property that they are actually trying to sell without any assessed value. We have to just pass the TIF, and then they'll tell us what they're going to get for it, which I think is ridiculous. I think we ought to be in the front, whether it's an executive session discussion or not. But North Charleston is going to get hurt by this, and I'll tell you why. The state port just recently bought property from Midwest Baco. That property is currently on the books, and North Charleston is collecting taxes. So that's going to be taken off of the book because the state port, doesn't pay any taxes. And so I don't know what it is. I called the mayor today to try to get out a number of what these people are actually paying now, and maybe try to work out something with the port that, they put in some type of revenue with the city of North Charleston, because those folks are going to have to provide the same services that we have: fire, police, and other entities. And so I would like to know, maybe Mr. Gao can tell us in the future, how much is Midwest Baco paying currently in property taxes, because the city will lose, and the county will lose, and the school board will lose. So, the city of Charleston wouldn't lose anything because currently not collecting anything. Secondly, this TIF is going to extend all the way down to the Harris Teeter, I believe. Now, from what I'm hearing from, some of the folks, I talked to one of the council members today, the mayor's proposing to put all those in the TIF, and then they won't pay taxes for 30 years, but I don't think the law allows that, because the TIF is for something new, not something that's already existing in the district, and these people's taxes should remain the same, as long as the TIF is in effect. So, Madam Attorney, I'd like to get a clarification on that too, because a TIF doesn't provide for current business; it provides for something new, and it's supposed to benefit the area or a blighted area. But these people haven't changed blighted to, whatever they want up to the state. And property taxes is, I don't know if we can do this, Ms. Ham. Since we're going to give these people a 30-year TIF, allegedly, we don't know for sure, And they're going to benefit, well, these folks is downtown in some of these businesses, their taxes are going to keep going up. So could it be somewhere we freeze their taxes for 30 years? And if they sell the business or sell the house, whoever buys it would actually pay whatever the current rate is right now. Now, I saw a gentleman in Sam's on yesterday, and he's a business owner. And he asked me the question, what about us? I've been down here for 30 years doing business, and, now I'm going to have to pay for somebody else coming in brand new. What can y'all do for us? And so I started thinking, and I said I would bring this before council to see legally can we do that, because the state controls property taxes. But I'd like to see something like that, because, gentrification has ruined, has rocked the city for a while. And some of these minority businesses, if they are in this TIF and their taxes keep going up, they're not going to be able to stay down there. So I would like to see if that's something that we can do, freeze these taxes where they are as long as the TIF is in place. And when the TIF goes away, then they pay the current taxes. If anybody got a question on what I'm trying to do, that's exactly what I'm, Sam, you can call me. But and if they decide to sell the business or sell the home, then whoever buys it would pay the current rate. It wouldn't be frozen. So just a few things that, I wanted to bring up. And then a percentage, I'd like Mr. Giles to see, give us a breakdown on what it would cost us if we do a 50% TIF versus 100% TIF.
Okay.
Yeah.
Mr. Pryor, there are some entities in that TIF that are currently paying taxes.
Yes.
And as we go forward, they would continue to pay taxes. Their values might go up from the benefit of the TIF and the infrastructure that's put in around them.
Mm-hmm.
The businesses don't get a waiver of increases in taxes for 30 years. They would be treated the same as any other commercial business.
I know normally that's how we do it, but what I'm saying, by no fault of theirs, their taxes are going to increase because of this new TIF that's coming in. And so we're going to forgive the guy or the developer, 30 years of actually paying into the system. So if it's something that we can do to make some type of a balance, that's what I'm looking for.
The developer would pay taxes like all the other entities that would.
Yep.
And that's the mechanism for the TIF, is that increase in revenues is what pays off the debt that's initially borrowed to do the infrastructure improvements. So the businesses really aren't getting a break because they're in the TIF. The city of Charleston is able to use part of their revenues rather than giving it to the other taxing entities to make those infrastructure improvements.
Yeah, but they eventually get it. I understand what you're saying, but logic would tell you, if they had to pay for that up front versus, I know they had to borrow money. I understand there's going to be some money borrowed. But actually, the taxes that they collect is going to pay that off. So it's like they're borrowing money for free.
The city of Charleston is the one that's going to borrow the money
Right.
and pay it. It's not really going to be the developer unless a philosophical discussion about who should actually do the infrastructure. Should it be the developer? Should it be the city?
Right. We don't know that yet because nobody's telling us who's going to purchase it. Well, we know who's going to purchase it, but nobody's telling us the price. And this TIF is based on if the sale is based on if we pass the TIF, but we don't know how much the sale is going to be until after we pass the TIF. And I don't want to put our taxpayers in that kind of position. So they should be able to tell us something up front, if they want to do it in private, executive session or whatever, but I need to know something before I make a big decision like this for 30 years because, it won't affect me for a long period of time, but it'll affect those that are coming behind me. I have a 6-year-old grandson. By the time it's over, he'll be 36. And so he would be saddled with basically some of this, but, and if we don't collect it, and the revenue stream doesn't come in our general fund, then we're going to have to raise taxes to keep our services. And I don't want to do that. Just my 2 cents.
Mr. Warman?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm gonna, I think, echo probably Ms. Honeycutt's latter concern, although I share both of them. When this came up the first time, think my general thought is that, you know, what's been discussed and what's been presented sounds really good, and I think would be a huge benefit, frankly, to the community. And, you know, something I would be willing to contribute. County funds, I get that, you know, maybe they don't exist if you don't do it, but the point is that the county would be subsidizing that in some pretty significant way. My concern is, you know, again, that I don't know how formalized any of this is, and I don't know how set in stone any of it is, and I understand the need for some flexibility probably on the developer's part in trying to get this done. I still believe, though, that there are ways to put in parameters so that it's not, you know, sort of this completely unguarded thing where we just have to sign off in whole one time without, you know, fully seeing how everything is going to play out. I still think there's ways that we could put in those parameters, be it, you know, parameters around a spending plan or parameters around some sort of process. So that's really what I'm focused on as we move forward, and I'll be interested certainly in any recommendations staff has or information staff has on that front. But yeah, I think a lot of folks probably want this to work. I don't know that, you know, I don't want to speak for fellow members, but I think a lot of folks up here would probably say we want this to work, but we got to do it in a way that makes sense, and we got to do it in a way that frankly I think would help keep it on track. So that's my general thoughts on it, and looking forward to learning more from what we hear as far as a report coming back.
Thank you, Mr. Werman. Anyone else?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Sass. I think we're dancing around the same thing. We've all got these same concerns. Let's let staff bring back all the concerns that we've voiced here. We want to get something done down there and be a part of it, but it's just we got to make sure we're looking out for the county and the taxpayers. So,
Right.
Speaking of which, we got another letter today that I wasn't very happy about, but we can talk about that another day and time, I guess. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
We have a lot to look forward to.
Yes.
And a lot of things to discuss. So,
Talking about the TIF, Mr. Darby.
Ms. Honeycutt?
I just want to make sure, Ms. Salisbury, we don't need a motion for the directive to bring back this information? Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Mr. Darby?
Please pardon my tiredness, sir. Please pardon me, sir. Traffic was horrendous. coming
It
from-
was.
Yes, it was.
I guess I want to take a look at the other spectrum, other end of the spectrum. With all the millions of dollars, which are going to be procured over the years, what are we doing for those folks who are on the lower middle class and below in terms of dollars and their taxes? Because within a 15, 20, 25 years, their taxes are going to grow exorbitantly. And what are we going to put aside for them? And how many millions of dollars are they expecting in terms of this?
I'm not sure we know exactly.
I think there was maybe an estimate of 400 million. 400
million. I mean, would it be nice if you could put 40 million aside for those low-income families and lower-middle-income families which happen to still be downtown? Because, just to give an example, living in North Charleston was not in favor of the Mixon Avenue TIF, and the rationale proved to be true. My insurance has gone from $1,100 a month to $475 a year, I should say. And that's because those folks are now reaping the benefits of this. And the taxes just go up. So I'm saying those persons who live there, we should try to find a way to assist them with their taxes. That's all I'm asking. If we can give the well-to-do $400 million, why can't we give those who are considered poor $40 million to assist with their taxes, because it's definitely going to go up. That would be my concern.
Thank you, sir. Anyone else? Thank you. So this discussion, staff will move forward, and we'll talk about this another day. Next item, Charleston County Sheriff's Office, 50-year employee, request to adopt, move to approve. Moved and seconded. Thank you very much. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Thank you. I'm going to move up item number 6, which is Public Works Directorate, Mark Clark Extension, memorandum of agreement regarding historic property impacts, request to approve.
Move for staff recommendation.
Second.
We will have a discussion, yes, sir. It's been moved by Mr. Moody and
Second.
seconded by Mr. Boykin. So let's have a discussion. Mr. Kabrowski.
Well, I've always been told that the committee is the time to have the open discussion, ask the questions, and I'm allowed to ask staff at the committee level. I'd like, because this is a public meeting, to, this affects everybody in the county, the taxpayers, to explain what this is. And then I have some follow-up questions. Who on the staff can explain it?
Mr. Adams can answer.
Sure. So this is a MOA, or Memorandum of Agreement, between the county, FHWA, SCDOT, SHPO, which is the State Historic Preservation Office, and also the Catawba Indian Tribe. The purpose of it is to comply with the environmental permitting process. So with that, this is one of the pieces where we have to identify historic sites within the corridor of the project, and make sure that we do our best to avoid those if possible, and or mitigate and resolve any impacts that we might have, that the project might have on those historic sites.
Well, I have the document 6A, and it says, and I read something and I have a question on it. As part of the development and environmental permitting of the Mark Clark Extension Project, the Federal Highway Administration has determined that the construction of the project will have an adverse effect upon the Fenwick Hall Historic District and River Road, both of which are eligible for listing in the National Register of Historic Places. FHWA, which is the Federal Highway Administration, has also determined that the construction of the project, meaning the Mark Clark, has the potential to cause adverse effects upon several archaeological sites that are eligible for listing in the NRHP, which is the National Register of Historic Places, and several archaeological sites that require additional research to determine their eligibility for listing in the National Register of Historic Places. So I asked the staff, when they say that the construction of the Mark Clark will have an adverse effect upon the Fenwick Hall Historic District and River Road, please tell us with specificity what those adverse effects of doing the Mark Clark will have upon Fenwick Hall Historic District and River Road. What are those adverse impacts?
So the agreement puts in place the requirement for the county and DOT. The county is the project sponsor. DOT is the project manager to do the due diligence to identify those historic sites. So the first step is identifying exactly where they are.
Well, please forgive me. I understand what the MOH is, but I asked us a question. Respectfully, it says that they have determined that the Federal Highway Administration has determined that the construction of the Mark Clark Expressway will have an adverse effect upon the Fenwick Hall Historic District and River Road. And I'm asking, what are those adverse effects that the Mark Clark Expressway completion will cause on Fenwick Hall Historic District and River Road? I'm asking to specify those adverse effects. And the follow-up to that is, what will it cost to offset that? And what projects listed on the upcoming referendum will or not be done because of those extra costs, if any? That's my question. Because when we did the ordinance to implement the sales tax referendums, this cost was not included in it, nor the adverse impacts. So those are my questions, sir.
So the cost to conduct the study is included in the funding that's already been provided to SCDOT.
Right, but,
The adverse effects.
right, that's what I'm asking.
Right, so those are identified conceptually at this point based on the alignment of the road. They can be mitigated or avoided through the design process. To say exactly what those adverse effects are at this point, it's unknown because the design can be modified to avoid those adverse impacts.
What will be the cost of mitigating those adverse effects? And second, where would the money come to spend to mitigate those adverse effects? What's the source of the money to mitigate those adverse effects?
So the mitigation could be accomplished through the design process. So by adjusting the alignment or the location of the bridge foundations, we could avoid the impacts. Therefore, the cost would be negligible on the overall project cost.
So,
Where would the cost come out of?
Mr. Kabrowski, I think I want to just clarify, because I've had some of this conversation with Mr. Adams earlier today. The cost of this study and any mitigation from it was already contemplated within the numbers that were provided for the project.
And where would the cost come out of if there's extra cost? Will it come out of the referendum funds? And that's my question. That's, I think, a fair question in committee, because that's what when I read the mutual understanding agreement, if I read the English right, it said the cost of implementing this will come out of the referendum of the tax revenues. Am I wrong in that?
Yes, in a sense, because of what the staff and the DOT have done is already taking this into account in the numbers that you have already approved.
So when it says that the cost will come out of it, they're wrong in the draft that I'm reading?
They're not wrong. The cost is already built in. So yes, it will come out, but the number has
Come out
already
of
been
where?
established.
When you say come out of where?
I'm not sure how to answer your question, Mr.
Come out of the general operating fund of the county?
It will
Or
come out
of
of
the sales tax
the-
referendum?
The cost of the project that has already been estimated. So right now, the way that the county has approved this is if the referendum passes, obviously those taxes will be collected, and there's a project cost that has been submitted to the public and to the DOT and to the FHWA, and that project cost includes any permitting processes, which this is a part of, and potential mitigation pursuant to those processes.
Right, and then am I reading it right, that it will come out of the referendum revenue? Is this a yes or no? That's how I read the draft memorandum.
Everything comes out of it.
Is that a yes or
I'm
no?
going to turn this back over to you, Mr.
I mean,
Sines.
people can laugh, but that's how I read it, and I don't know why I can't be yes or no, respectfully.
Excuse me,
They can laugh at me,
Mr.
but I feel it deserves a yes or no answer. Where the source of the money for the mitigation comes from.
it comes from, it's part of the whole construction cost. And that's all funded by the transportation sales tax.
Okay, thank you, that's what I was asking for, thank you.
When you build a bridge, you have to put in supports, and you may have to move a support because of a utility line or something else. And it's part of the normal process. Mr. Boykin?
Mr. Adams, is it correct that the $75 million we approved here on county council that was asked for by the State Department of Transportation, that was matched by the SIB, that $150 million was for the acquisition of right-of-way and any other work that needed to be done to get the permitting process complete?
That's correct?
Would this not be considered part of the permitting process? So those funds have already been allocated, correct?
Correct.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Boykin. Mr. Darby?
Just to piggyback what has been said, it said the FHWA and the SCDOT have consulted with South Carolina State Historic Preservation Office, the Catawba Indian Nation Tribal Historic Preservation Office, the Eastern Shawnee Tribal Historic Preservation Office, and the Muskogee Creek Nation Tribal Historic Preservation Office to resolve adverse effects on the eligible NRHP sites and regarding the effects of the undertaking. What if these adverse effects cannot be resolved, particularly with the preservation of Indian land? Does that mean that the project is going to go forward? Is that what that means? So in other words, the majority of the council said if we go forward in spite of the adverse effect upon these various preservation sites.
So once the sites are identified and clearly understood what those impacts are, other mitigation may be necessary. We just don't know the answer to that. So that could be things that would be working with the Tribal Historic Preservation Society to offset maybe off-site of the project or some signage. We put some Palmetto Commerce Parkway some signs about the old rice fields, was kind of, and some education that went behind that, where we went around to schools and taught about the history of the rice fields, where we impacted them on Palmetto Commerce Parkway, Phase 2. So that was part of the mitigation of the impact to that historic site.
Do we know if any of these sites are grave sites, particularly for Native Americans?
I'm sorry, I don't know that at this time.
Well, that would be my conjecture. What if that is the case, Mr. Sass? Will we still move forward? But I guess, I mean, individual councilors have their votes, so it's a mute question, sir.
Mr. Sass, I just want to make sure that council understands the purpose of this particular document. It is for the protection in the process that we're going through. It's for the it's so that we are held somewhat accountable to make sure that we take into account historic preservation sites that may or may not exist, and that whatever mitigation is necessary can be done in that process, so that things aren't overlooked or mishandled in any way. So this document is for the protection of those historic sites, not necessarily, we've already engaged in the process to move this permitting process forward. This is a step in the process just to assure that we are taking the necessary steps to protect potential historic sites.
And that I understand, Ms. Ham, but at the same time, it states that the potential to cause adverse effects. And if there's a cause for adverse effects, there's a possibility that there will be adverse effects. So that's my point. But anyhow, it's up to the council in terms of their vote in the majority rules, but I would be very much remiss if we didn't say something, particularly when it comes down to Native Americans who basically have been not treated fairly for quite some time. That's it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Darby. Any further discussion? Mr. Boykin again?
Just real briefly, Mr. Adams, is this not mainly pro forma? I mean, in any highway project, not specifically related to the Mark Clark extension, any highway project that requires NEPA permitting?
Yes.
Thank you.
I just have one follow-up question.
Mr. Kaprowski?
It says the Federal Highway Works Administration has determined that the construction of the Mark Clark Extension, Charleston County, South Carolina, will have an adverse effect upon Fenwick Hall Historic District. That's not, as I read that, conjectural. That's, they've determined that. What have they determined? That's what I asked before. I'm not sure respectfully I got an answer. So that there's been a determination by a federal agency that it will have an adverse effect. And I just am respectfully asking from the staff, what is that adverse effect that they have determined? I have not been given that knowledge.
Councilman Kowalski, if you look at the back of the agreement, there's a map there that shows the alignment, and it shows the Fenwick property, in particular, the historic boundaries. So I think the FHWA statement that it will have adverse speaks to the fact that the alignment will cross the property.
And the alignment, meaning the 526 extension, will cross the lines of Fenwick Hall?
Correct. So if you look at that map, you can see the roadway alignment in blue, and the property is kind of in a shaded purple. And the specific site is in historic sites that are known at this time are in yellow. So I think the statement that it will is just acknowledging that the alignment will cross over the property boundaries that are already classified as historic.
Any further questions? Mr. Moody?
Ms. Ham, to boil it all down, we're getting lost in the muck here. This memorandum of understanding or agreement, a yes vote means you're in favor of preserving artifacts, graveyards, Native American findings, and working to mitigate those.
That's correct.
And no vote says you're not in favor of that.
That's correct.
Thank you, ma'am.
Whoa. Well, then I'm reading this entirely different.
You are reading it
That's why
wrong.
I wanted to make sure that we understood what the purpose of the agreement was.
Good point, Mr. Moody.
Thank you.
Any further discussion?
Okay.
I'd like to, amend that if I could, well, to say that the.
Motion's already on the floor.
My comment is, we don't know the cost of it yet, is that correct? So how do we,
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir.
any associated costs have to come back to council for approval. Correct? Even though, even though the money is available and sitting in a pot, it would have to come back to us for final approval.
Mr. Pryor,
For DOT,
yeah, you've already approved this.
I understand,
It-
but what I'm saying is council would be notified because, if the FHWA is saying there could be some impact, I would like for them to identify those impacts because it's for them to just send a memo saying it might, but they haven't identified anything. So what this does is, if I'm reading this correctly, is it allows us to go out, and if there are any sites that would be affected, then we would have a chance to mitigate it.
Right.
That's why, the way I read it. But if we don't, then I guess DOT just got the right to go ahead and do what they want to do if we vote against this, because there would be no protection in place. So I'm thinking this is if I'm hearing everybody right, and I'm reading it right, this is some kind of protection to say, go out and find out, which of these historic places are going to be damaged, infringed upon, and then see whatever y'all can do to immediately go around it, mitigate with them and says, hey, look, we can move this over here. I guess that's what we are trying to do in this
Right.
motion.
This is an agreement to work with the State Historic Preservation Office, the Federal Highway Administration Program, the Catawba Indians. That's why everyone's included, so that during the permitting process, all of those things are taken into account. The permitting process is already underway. That's already been authorized and funded. This is just a very minimal part in that process.
But to Mr. Darby's point, I wouldn't want to go out and dig up anybody's ancestors' grave if that required it. We would have to go around that or figure out some kind of way to get around that because, I wouldn't be in favor of moving, and somebody's ancestors' grave. So if we do discover, then our staff or somebody would have to go back to the drawing board to figure out how to get around that.
That's exactly why the State's Historic Preservation
Okay.
Office is involved, as well as the
All right.
Catawba Indians
Okay.
organization.
Mr. Boykin?
I guess just try to put a final or fine point on this whole thing. Our execution of this instrument is required in order for us to receive a permit, yes or no? Thank you.
Yes, that's
Okay, so that makes it plain and simple. We have to do this as part of the process. It's a requirement. Thank you.
It's a requirement for the permit, correct? And are we not amending the sales tax ordinance by doing this? Because we're saying the money comes out of the sales tax referendum fund.
That money is already been approved. These groups have all agreed that there may be some historic artifacts and historic things that are in that right of way, or that would be affected by the Mark Clark. So they're all agreeing that if anything like that is found, that they will be preserved, and that the Mark Clark will not be allowed to damage those. That they have to mitigate it. They have to go around it or figure out some way to preserve it. It's very, very straightforward. The state, all these groups have all agreed to this process. And like Mr. Adams said earlier, this is normal for every road, for just about every road project that gets done. We have to go through this. So,
One more point, Mr.
yes, sir,
Chairman.
Mr. Pryor.
If some of you have been here when we did the Palmetto Commerce Parkway, remember that graveyard for the general, I can't remember his name, and what we did was, when we found out that was a historic site, we put a protection around it by putting the fencing out and preserve that, and realigned the road to go around that. And so I think this is what we are trying to do in this process. I can't remember the guy's name, but it was he was I think even up in Washington D.C., some big way. I can't remember the name, but it'll come back later. But once we found that out, it was brought back to our attention, and we mitigated to preserve that site. And right now, if anybody wanted to go see it, they can see it because we put up a big fence around it and protected the graveyard.
As it should be.
Huh?
As it should be.
As it should be, yeah.
Is there any further discussion? It's been moved and seconded. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
What was the count, Ms. Clerk?
Do a roll call for me, please, so everybody can be on record. Because I didn't hear everybody say anything, so.
Mr. Boykin?
Aye.
Mr. Darby?
No, no.
Mrs. Honeycutt?
Aye.
Mr. Kabrowski?
No.
Mr. Middleton?
Aye.
Mr. Moody?
I'm voting to preserve, aye.
Mr. Pryor?
Aye.
Mr. Werman?
No.
Mr. Sass?
Aye.
Motion passes 6 ayes, 3 nays.
Thank you. We go back to item number 4, a presentation for vulnerability draft assessment report.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir.
before she makes that presentation, can we go through the other agenda, so Ms. Lori can go, said have no wait? Can we go through 5 and then come back to the 4A?
See why not?
All right, I'm gonna move for approval from
A through
5A
J.
through
Second. J.
5J.
Second.
5A through 5J, Mr. Pryor and Mr. Middleton. Is there any discussion about any one of these items? Mr. Boykin?
Just briefly, I'd like to recognize my leadership from Saul Agree community out here that came tonight for item 5H. Thank you.
Saw him in the elevator. Okay. Anything else? Any other, Mr. Moody?
Recognize Ms. Smith from CVB. They do great work with us on these recommendations, and there's just a lot of good, exciting infrastructure projects in here. So it's a good mix. Thank you.
All right. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it. Thank
You
you.
may leave, Ms. Smith. Class is dismissed.
Okay, now we're going to do number 4. We're going backwards and forwards. Now we're going to do number 4. Vulnerability draft assessment report.
Good afternoon, members of council. This afternoon, we have our consultant here from Fernley. They will be giving us a presentation on our vulnerability assessment. As you may recall, this assessment is an action item out of the resilience element of the comprehensive plan. So now I would like to introduce Matt Hutchins, CEO of Fernley.
Thank you. My name is Matt Hutchins with Fernleaf, and appreciate the opportunity to present to you the multi-hazard vulnerability assessment. I'll give you an overview, a little bit about the approach and the process, and some of the outcomes and results of the final report. To tell you a little bit about the project approach, what's unique about this project, this assessment, has been a highly collaborative project working with county staff. In particular, and through coordination with the Chief Resilience Officer, I want to give a special thanks to Karen Green and all of her hard work, dedication, and coordination between the project team and departments involved in the project. The project involved workshops, so hands-on input from community, from county staff, and in working with the community focus group throughout the process. Also working directly with department heads through 8 in-person workshops and 7 virtual ones. We also provided council and committee updates to the Resilience and Sustainability Advisory Committee and also to County Council in September of last year. We also did staff training in terms of use of this assessment and are providing a final report and brief. The project approach is based around the Steps to Resilience, which is a planning process developed by NOAA, and there's a website called at toolkit.climate.gov. And it's been applied in state, regional, and municipal planning throughout the United States. It really is a risk assessment and management framework and supported by resources and tools. So you can see here in the graphic on the right-hand side shows the steps and process of the Steps to Resilience framework. And what's important is it goes from assessment and understanding of hazards and vulnerabilities to starting to brainstorm preliminary options and strategies for managing those. The other importance is that element of equitable resilience, and the community focus group process really ensured that community perspectives were involved throughout the entire approach and progress of the work. So first, what is climate resilience, and what is this assessment about and about informing? Here are 2 scenarios of, on the left-hand side, a less resilient scenario where if we think about functional capacity of our communities, that's what this line represents. That when hazards impact our communities, it impacts the functional capacities. These are the livelihoods, the services that residents, that citizens rely on. And there's a certain amount of impact to or disruption to those functional capacities. And there's a certain amount of time to recovery of those systems. A more resilient scenario involves making investments to build resilience before these hazards impact communities so that recovery happens earlier and that the impact is not felt as deeply, and in particular in not crossing certain tipping points that impact communities more long-term or permanently. So that's what this assessment is about understanding what these impacts are, how hazards can impact these functional capacities within the community, and then how can investments be informed to increase that resilience and recovery time. The assessment also is centered around people and community assets. The assessment looks at 6 different elements of community systems that you can see here, from residential properties to looking at cultural community services, critical infrastructure, industrial and commercial properties, and also open space and natural areas. So these are the tangible and intangible values of the community. The assessment then analyzed these community systems according to different hazards, and it took a multi-hazard approach, which is also unique in terms of resilience building. The assessment looked at 13 assessments in total that included 9 types of flooding. You can see here both current and future flooding that looked at different types, including tidal, coastal surge, riverine, and stormwater flooding, but also extreme heat, wildfire, earthquake, and high wind vulnerabilities or hazards. The flood data sources include multiple sources of information, including federal information from USGS, FEMA, and NOAA, but also the Woodwell Research Center. When we think about vulnerabilities, here's a picture that helps to illustrate the scale at which the assessment took into account different characteristics. So here in this picture, we have 3 homes that are equally exposed to the potential of flooding, but based on their characteristics have different levels of vulnerability. The house in the middle is more vulnerable due to its building elevation and the first floor elevation in the floodplain. So these are the types of considerations and the scale at which the assessment was performed. The assessment of vulnerabilities was quantified countywide. The report provides this risk data in a summary of findings for all hazards and all community assets. It also provides summary information for 15 individual planning area summaries, and those planning areas are shown here on this map on the right-hand side. In terms of findings, a few of these multi-hazard findings, more than 35,000 properties the assessment found are vulnerable to high wind due to structures being constructed before wind design requirements were in place within the county. More than 5,000 properties are especially vulnerable to potential for earthquake, and about half of these were constructed before the 1886 earthquake that are especially vulnerable. About 18,000 properties are found vulnerable to potential for wildfire. It's throughout the county. And really key here is that many assets, community assets, have multi-hazard vulnerabilities, especially for the hazards of flooding, wind, and earthquake. And that really highlights the potential for multi-hazard benefits that solutions can provide. Another key finding is that road access is a critical vulnerability both for flooding and wildfire. This is in terms especially for emergency services and emergency response for managing both of those types of events. And another finding is that there's significant flood vulnerability to the 20-year potential flood return period. And it was close to that for some areas to the 100-year flood vulnerability. Here's an example of an assessment of critical infrastructure in the 20-year flood event. This is based on the 20-year flooding from USGS. It found that 14% of critical infrastructure properties countywide are vulnerable. An example types infrastructure includes schools, communications, police, fire, and EMS facilities, hospitals, and pump and lift stations. The map there on the right-hand side shows in the darker red areas where a higher proportion of assets or a higher number are vulnerable. Another key takeaway from the flood assessments is that there is flood vulnerability outside of the regulatory floodplain. This pie graph here shows all properties countywide, and the dark green shows those properties that were built before flood requirements were in place for flood development ordinances, or that are constructed in the non-regulatory floodplain but are flood prone. And so it shows here that about 20% of all properties in the county are not elevated to deal with that type of flooding. Another key takeaway is that future flooding will increase in severity. These two charts show the potential for flooding depth for all properties throughout the county. On the top right shows the current 1% annual chance or 100-year flood scenario, with the darkest purple color there showing the proportion of properties that could experience at least 3 feet of flooding. Below that is a future flood risk analysis that looks at that proportion more than doubling, and that's with the future scenario with 2.5 feet of sea level rise. So the assessment is here to inform opportunities and next steps, and here are a few. The first is building awareness. This assessment can inform and help to identify and communicate vulnerabilities. Another here is the opportunity that the assessment provides in the ability to incorporate the assessment into planning initiatives. That there's going to be continued engagement with the community leaders and focus group, and that's the foundation that's the assessment process established. And another opportunity is the use of the assessment that the county has for grant applications and funding opportunities. Another next step and a highlight is that there's a project in the county selected already by the Climate Smart Communities Initiative for Fernleaf, our group, to develop a flood mitigation strategy at no cost to the county. Also, in terms of next steps, when working with a county staff, the assessment identified preliminary strategies and action opportunities. To do that, the team took a whole government approach to thinking about different types of strategies. So really a portfolio approach to not just thinking about infrastructure, but also thinking about planning, funding and financing, land use, community engagement, and natural infrastructure as well. This also incorporated actions and considered actions within existing plans, programs, operations, but also started to brainstorm new multi-hazard benefit strategies with action opportunities that can target key vulnerabilities the assessment highlights, and also that the actions and strategies can be robust in the face of future change. Here are a couple examples of these preliminary strategies. One is on extreme heat planning, to develop a heat education warning and response program with local agencies in collaboration with community-based organizations, medical institutions, and state agencies. Another example strategy here is resilience, building resilience of county-owned or county-managed properties, enhancing resilience of and through county-owned facilities and infrastructure using findings and information from the assessment. In addition to that, the assessment provides the county with the ability to communicate and think about resilience benefits. And that's where the assessment can be used not only to identify vulnerabilities, but to articulate and identify project benefits. Here's an example from the peninsula, an example of a tidal flooding reduction check valve that in being able to identify and use the assessment, identified that this one check valve location reduced vulnerability of 50% of churches, 20% of the vulnerability for public housing, and 10% of the vulnerability existing for critical facilities for this type of tidal flooding hazard. As I mentioned with the final report, the report is designed as a resource. It includes 11 preliminary strategies and action opportunities. It includes additional findings and also planning area summaries for each of the 15 planning areas mentioned earlier. So with that, I want to say thank you to you all, and also special thanks to all the county staff and the community focus group members. And I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Anyone have any questions?
Recommendations to Ms. Green and to the presenter, and certainly to this work. Understanding vulnerability, recognizing opportunities, convening, in a multifaceted approach to mitigating this issue that's never going away. I appreciate the thoughtfulness, and then also looking at the opportunities that it does present to enable us to use the data compiled in order to go after other areas of funding or participating in federal, state, private, other opportunities that would enable us to actively reduce, those areas of vulnerability and not wait until things happen and then trying to mitigate a response to that, where we saw that graphic that you had up that there's no recovery. We will never recover, especially certain communities. So I appreciate it, and certainly this is something that's near and dear to me because I think we're environmental stewards. Resilience is just one side of the coin, and then sustainability is the other. And so I think both go hand in hand. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councilman.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Thank you, sir. Karen, y'all did a great job. A lot of people participated in this from the
Yes, sir.
county. I read,
Yes, sir. We had a county working group, and they were really great.
it, and y'all had y'all had a number of meetings, and
Yes.
y'all
Yes. It
y'all
took
put a lot of
little
information together here.
Yes, sir.
So appreciate that. Thank y'all very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. All right.
My prayer, Mr. Chair, and I know it's time to go, that the report doesn't sit on a shelf, but it becomes an active, living thing that enables us to do those actionable steps when appropriate to save our county.
Yes, sir. Thank you all very much. Great job. Last item, number 7, recommendations from the Special Housing Committee.
Committee recommendation.
Second. Mr. Pryor, seconded by Mr. Boykin. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? The ayes have it. Thank you. This meeting's adjourned. Tense line.
Yeah, the last few meetings have been.
Talk with his insurance.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
You know, watching all this stuff.